Hala Mohideen in Doha. We're bringing you live pictures right now from the Thai capital, Bangkok, where protesters are being faced by riot police and water cannon. The Thai police are trying to disperse protesters there with those water cannon. They're on the streets now for the second day. This comes, of course, after a decree, a ban on gatherings, which was instituted by the Thai Prime Minister. Let's get more now from Scott Heidler, who's in Bangkok. Scott, just tell us what's happening where you are, because you've been at that protest site for most of the day.
Vehicles out there, two of them. And what has happened is, as we were talking about earlier, what the protesters did is, in a sense, they duped the police, saying that they were going to hold another large protest where they did Thursday evening, where more than 10,000 came out. But instead, they did it about a kilometer down the road. So where we are now, where this confrontation is happening now, is in between those two locations. It's actually in front of a very popular high-end shopping mall right in the central part of Bangkok called Paragon. And what had happened is the riot police gave warnings to the protesters down the road, and they started marching down the road. And then that was met by some of the protesters, I would say hundreds of the protesters, marching down to meet them. And then there was kind of a battle line drawn. The police over loudspeakers encouraged them, tried to encourage the protesters to stand down, to move back, even told them that they loved them, that they should think about their families. They didn't. It became more aggressive. They counted down to 10 twice, and then they opened with the water cannon, and then they marched forward. And that's kind of where we're seeing now. It's a bit of a stalemate right now. I can see some of the gates being tossed toward the water cannon, and this has kind of been going back and forth, I would say, for the last maybe half hour. The standoff lasted maybe 15 minutes before that, but then this kind of pushed forward by the crowd control police, and it looks like they might be retreating a little bit now. Yes, it does. It looks like they're moving back right now. The water cannon trucks are moving back. I'm actually standing next to where I guess you could call it the triage area for some of the crowd control police. Looks like they're a bit winded. We know that some of that water cannon, they were using a blue chemical liquid mixed in with the water cannon, and that, from experience, is a burning agent. Most of the time, there's a burning agent in it. I can't confirm that with this, but that's what I think is why some of these policemen are down on the ground behind me. Not many, just a couple. And it appears as though they're retreating a bit. The police have pulled back. The water cannon vehicles backed up, I'd say, maybe about 5 meters, but now they're stationary. They're stationary. And it looks like on both sides, again, this is kind of a wide dual-lane roadway, and it looks like, the riot police have been on the sidewalk, and the protesters in the middle of the road. And it looks like they have retreated back a bit, and the protesters aren't advancing at the moment. So it looks like it might have been a pause. Water cannon are not firing. The police have gone back to holding their shields. You can hear in the loudspeaker they're still pleading for them to back down. Protesters are dragging the barricades that the police earlier used to try to keep them in place, unsuccessfully at this point. What was interesting, Paula, that kind of the tactics of the police was to, once the ruse was unveiled, where they went to a different area, a different large intersection, and occupied that. The police didn't go over there in force. They stayed where they were before. And then that's when we saw this happen. So they kind of announced that they were going to march towards the new position, and then the protesters ran up to meet them, and then that's when we've had this confrontation. It appears as though right now it's a pause.
It seems something of a cat and mouse game here, Scott.
Retreating back a bit.
Sorry to cut you off, Scott. It seems there's a bit of cat and mouse going on with the protesters and with the law enforcement. What exactly are the protesters trying to do? Because so that we're clear, these kind of gatherings on the streets have now been outlawed. Protesters aren't really allowed to gather in large numbers in the town at the moment. So what are they aiming to do?
Well, right now, I think what we can say, Hala, overall, they have three demands. The first demand is that the cabinet resign. Second demand is that the Constitution is rewritten so the distribution of power, in their views, is more equally worked out. And then the third is a reform of the monarchy. Those have been their demands. They've been refined, if you will, over the last week or so, but those are generally what they have been asking for throughout this protest movement, started by students, young students, back in July. And we've seen a multitude of different types of protests, if you will, smaller scale at schools, bigger, much larger venues. A couple weeks ago, we saw one that with tens of thousands of people, peaceful. I mean, it's very easy to say that this is the most violent confrontation we have seen by far since July. And so I think what we're seeing here now is that yesterday they came out after the big day when they had a protest gathering at the Democracy Monument, and they marched onto Government House, and then that's when this decree was passed. Those several hundred that spent the night out front of Government House, the decree came out at 4 o'clock in the morning. They peacefully left. The police came on loudspeakers, said, look, this decree's been passed. You need to leave. And they did peacefully under the direction of the protest leadership. And then we saw after that, hours after that, the protest last night in very similar areas where I am now, Central Bangkok shopping district. That lasted for hours, about 6 hours, but ended peacefully at 10 o'clock. The police said, it's time to leave. The protest leaders, the then kind of new leadership, because most of the top leadership, the most recognizable, the high-profile leaders, have all been arrested.
Okay.
So I think what we're seeing here now, this is they just wanted to keep it going, and it could have very well been partially prompted by comments today by Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, where he officially presented the emergency decree to the cabinet in an emergency meeting today, Friday, and then came out of that cabinet meeting and said, you will get arrested. This is now turned violent, so we're going to come out and arrest you if you turn up. So he kind of turned up the volume, and then the protesters, not as many as Thursday night, but they came out, and clearly all came to a head with this. It was, I have to tell you, this is with this kind of march over by the crowd control police. That has definitely been the most aggressive posture I've seen them yet. We've seen the water trucks parked around where some of the protest venues were in the past, but never used, never deployed, not even just kind of driven onto the street or even close to the front line, if you will, for the protesters and police. Where this is the first time, and this is kind of your classic crowd control operation. Two lines of police with helmets and shields, banging them, kind of trying to intimidate the protesters and kind of wave, and then the water trucks kind of come up, douse them, and then now they've kind of retreated. But again, as I can see now, the protesters are kind of, at this stage, just holding their ground. They haven't advanced at all, and most of the, looking now, yes, most of the crowd control police are now behind the water cannon vehicles, and actually now I can see that there are three, kind of side by side, pretty much taking up the entire width of the road.
Scott, just give us a sense of the momentum behind this protest movement. You say that these are younger protesters. It's been the youth who've been driving this. Certainly, to viewers watching these screens, there does seem to be similarities with the kind of youth-driven protest movement that we've seen in places like Hong Kong. But how are they managing to? Are they getting general public support behind them on this cause to try and take on the Prime Minister, get these electoral reforms? But they've also been trying to get reforms to the monarchy as well, which is a very touchy subject where you are, is it not?
It absolutely is. And what's been interesting is that there has been a distinct evolution of what we've seen since July. It started as, post-school dismissal, young students. When I say young, I mean, kind of middle school and high school age, still in their uniforms, protesting, marching to the Minister of Education's office, sitting outside until he spoke with them, and he finally did. So it started there. Then it slowly escalated. They got more students involved. General public became involved. And when we saw a real spike in support is when a populist group, a political group called the Red Shirts. Those are people that supported the Thaksin Shinawatra and the Yingluck Shinawatra dynasty, if you will. They both held prime ministerships here, and they were much more populist politicians. So you had the red shirts become involved. So that really stopped the numbers. Almost overnight, we've had 4 major protests. The second largest major protest was because the red shirts turned out, and then they have been coming out as well. But quite honestly, when you look at what they're fighting for, what they say, the changes they want in Thailand, again, as you mentioned, Holly, yes, it's a very touchy subject when you speak about the monarchy because of the laws here. This is territory. I've been living in Bangkok and covering Thai politics for 8 years. This is the farthest I have ever seen any kind of movement discuss reform within the monarchy. I've never seen it go this far. And what really has kind of spiked things this week is because the king is back in town. And we had an incident on Wednesday where the motorcade of the Queen passed close to where this other protest march is going on. Some of the protesters, activists, approached the motorcade and flew the 3-finger salute that has become an icon for these identifying icon for these protesters. And then that was part of the reason why Prayut Chan-o-cha said that he was going to put forth and pass this emergency decree. He said because the situation is becoming violent, because of the security of the nation was at stake. So he used that as part of it, and actually they've arrested 2 activists for that incident. So when you look at the sensitivity and the testing of the power structures here that have been in place for decades, this protest movement has escalated quite dramatically. When you look at the students sitting down inside their classrooms demanding change to where we are now. It looks like that the crowd control police are again pushing up to the front line. The water cannons kicked in for a second. So, Holly, yes, it's been quite a steep escalation, if you will, but particularly tonight, because this is something we haven't seen in these last several months.
It certainly isn't. Scott Howder, we'll leave it there for now, but thank you so much for talking us through that escalation at the protest site in central Bangkok. More, of course, from Scott and the team later in the day. But for now, we're going to take you